You know nobody's coming ever to rescue you, right? Nobody gets a file.
Hanrahan Live.
Today we speak to filmmaker and researcher Thomas Dekeyser. He talked to us about anti-tech activism and why societal destruction might be good. So you're part of this really interesting organisation. I came across it online. I was like, this is really quite unique. Tell us about it. What is Destructionist International?
Yeah, cool. Destructionist International is, on the most basic level, just a group of people, kind of researchers, artists, trying to do cool stuff. And specifically, the kind of stuff we do is to try and kind of put things into the spotlight, specifically things that are usually kind of at the sort of fringes of like politics, so like people or actions that are not generally considered political, and kind of like focus on those and see what we can learn from them. So that's kind of it on a very basic level. But to kind of go a little bit more deeply into that maybe, so the name Destructionist International is actually a reference to Situationist International. I don't know if people have heard of this group, but they were like a group in the 1960s in France. Again, kind of artists, doing cool stuff, but like very much critiquing kind of what they saw as like the problems of their era. Kind of, they called it the spectacle, which basically
Guide the board and shit.
Yeah, exactly. That kind of stuff. Basically arguing that in their era, because of mass consumer culture, mass media, and so on, people were just becoming, like citizens were becoming increasingly kind of pacified, right? And so what they were trying to do was like come up with like ways of responding to that to kind of like break the spectacle. What we're doing is not as sort of grand as that, but what we're kind of trying to ask is, what do we need to do in order to kind of respond to our kind of present moment, by which I mean, they were critiquing the spectacle, but actually today's moment is very different. You've got digital media, you've got social media, neoliberalism is something very different now. But so kind of in that current moment, like how do we respond to that, and specifically what kind of media do we need to produce, what kind of texts, what kind of films, and so on. Because I think it comes from like a very much a strong impulse, which is like, there's so much bad stuff going on. We're aware of all these things. In fact, we're kind of overwhelmed by information constantly, and yet we feel kind of like hopeless amidst all that. So it's what we're trying to do is, I guess, on a very minor level, like create films, create texts that like try and kind of do something a bit different than just, here's another bleak thing you need to know about, So I think that's kind of what we're trying to do, is trying to find something that's kind of a different route to that for media, like something that's not just consciousness raising about all the terrible things that are happening,
You got like, so I wrote it down, there's a thing where it says like, you're dedicated to the negative in all forms. Like, as bad as that sounds, I was like, yeah, that's interesting. Like, what does it mean? Like, I understand that you're not walking around like moaning or like pushing old ladies over, but it's quite a kind of specific idea, right?
Yeah, so I think it's a response to this sort of fake hopefulness and optimism that we often see. Like talking about we make films, and like when you look at a lot of documentary films, it's very often like, here's this really bleak thing, and at the end it's like there's like a call to action, but like you can go and do this. There's this sort of hopefulness at the end of it that's often very like empty rhetoric. And what we're interested in is, I guess, going in a different direction, which is to kind of follow groups, follow actions, follow things that people have done that were very different to that were just like, there's this terrible thing happening, we're going to dismantle it, and that's where we're going to go, and we're going to take it from there, rather than this sort of like, oh, let's all be friends and things will be great. It's like, no, they won't. Like, there's too many terrible things going on that we can't just get out of by being hopeful.
Yeah,
so
no one's coming to save you, basically.
Exactly, yeah. I think that's kind of how we're interpreting that.
You did the film I watched, I really liked it, Machines in Flames. That was like, when you see something, you're like, wow, like, I have to watch this right now. Like, I thought it was one of the things, I never heard of the group. Tell us about that. That was about this like very specific group I'd never heard of, even though I'm very interested in this stuff. Clodo. Can you tell us all about what that was?
Yeah. So Clodo is a group. Well, first of all, Clodo is an acronym, and in French it means, Clodo means it's like slang for a homeless person. But it was basically an anarchist group, and CLODO stands for, in English, Committee for the Subversion and Destruction of Computers. So kind of they did sort of enact that. So what that means is they literally went and burnt down computer companies like Sperry Univac, Philips, and they were active mainly in kind of south of France, around a specific city of Toulouse, going around, sneaking into offices of computer companies and basically just setting it on fire and setting the computers on fire. But what was really interesting, so they started in 1980, right? And they did like 10 or so attacks, but in 1983, they basically sent out a last sort of message, and after that, they just vanished, and literally no one knows what happened to them. Like, you go and speak to people who were active in that period in the kind of anarchist scenes, 1980s, and they're just like literally no one knows.
Never
the police
heard of.
doesn't know what happened to them. It's just like they just vanished. And so the film that we made, Machines in Flames, is basically our attempt, so our being myself and my co-director, our attempt to try and understand like who these people were, what were they trying to do, what were their politics, because it seems so like from today's perspective, it seems almost absurd to go and like burn down a computer company. We can barely imagine that. And so we were really drawn to that because it feels like so incredibly different to like how today we talk about kind of how we need to deal with problems on the internet or like through social media or whatever. It feels very different. And so the film is kind of our attempt at like making sense of what they were trying to do and maybe the contemporary relevance. Not to say we need to go and burn down computer companies, but basically to think about what's the idea behind it? What were they trying to critique and maybe what can we learn from that?
And what were they trying to do? Like, what was the purpose to go and burn the computers?
I mean, it's a difficult question because a lot of, like the name, CLODO, also a lot of the things they wrote, I mean, they didn't write so many things, like a few communiques and like one self-interview. And it's like filled with jokes. It's like, they're like, at some point they're like saying, oh, we don't live on Mars, we're not Marxists, we're something else. It's like, it just makes no sense. And so there's like loads of like jokes and like, you just can't really take them too seriously when you read their messages. Saying that, it is quite clear that what they were critiquing, which was specifically they were critiquing how at that time, so like you have to remember in the early 1980s, there were obviously no phones, but there were also, or like no cell phones, but there was also like the desktop computer just didn't exist yet. Computers only existed really in like the hands of the state or like big corporations. And so when they were attacking computers, they were attacking specifically how computers were being used by the state, by the military, by the police. So theirs was very much a critique of kind of how computers became kind of like killing machines, like how computers were used basically in order to do warfare better, in order to kill better, but also how computers were used in order to do better policing. So like around that time, you had a lot of like radical movements in the 70s and the 80s, often armed kind of groups, like the Red Brigades in Italy, the RAF in Germany, Action Directe in France. And so the police was often looking for new ways of like trying to find out more about these people. So they created, computers were a way of like gathering information about these groups in order to basically kind of work against any kind of like revolutionary potential that there might be in those specific contexts. So what they were critiquing, in other words, CLODO was very much how the kind of computers were used by military, by the police, in order to repress people, basically. But on a more general level, they were critiquing what was happening in that very moment, but they were also more generally kind of suggesting that computers would increasingly become these tools of oppression, basically. So like rather than like in the 1990s, you had this very kind of utopian idea of like computers would liberate us all and we would be...
Cyberpunk.
Exactly, yeah. Like we would have this utopian society whereby we're not limited by the state and not limited by the market. We can, full freedom of expression, full freedom of information, all of that. CLODO was basically like 10 years earlier saying that is not going to happen. What's going to happen is that computers are going to be used for more surveillance. They're going to be used to capture people's attention. They're going to be used for like more corporate gain. Like they're not going to do all these crazy, like these emancipatory things that some people at the time were already thinking might happen with computers. So there was a very it's really interesting thing about that was their critique in the early 1980s when computers were barely existed, right?
Way ahead of their time in that, but also in the kind of like comical communiques.
Yeah.
Like if you see that, it reminds me of something you'd see from like, unfortunately, some kind of like maniac 4chan shooter. They'd put all this like nonsense in the communiques to kind of throw off the normies. But in that sense, it's like they were way ahead of their time even in that. Did you discover like who these people actually are without like baiting them up? Like how close did you get?
So there was this moment when in order to get information about this group, because like I said, this group, there's very little known about them. Like there were just a handful of communiques and this one self-interview that they published themselves through a magazine. So in order to get more information, I went to Toulouse, where this group was active mainly. Went to this kind of anarchist archive space, and they were like, I was just like asking, do you have any other newspapers, like articles about them, like any information? Do you have anything like in publishing that's been published about this group that I can learn about? And they were like, well, yeah, there's like a few extra newspaper articles, but they were also like, they like knew that this group had existed because they were like older, like an older generation, these people in the archive. And they were like, yeah, we know that this group existed. And they were sort of very like vague. They were kind of like, maybe we have known them or were related to them. Like they weren't like specifying that at all. But that's basically the closest we got, was someone saying we may have known of them or we may have known them. Like anything closer, but you have to remember, like it's 4 decades ago, right? 4 decades ago, maybe these people are no longer around. Maybe they have gone a completely different route. Like you have a lot of radicals in like other movements that like from that era that then went like fully right-wing after that. Like it's possible that same thing happened to Clodagh. We don't know. And I think that is part of kind of what's interesting about this group, is that they just vanished. It's like, which group would like self-abolish in that way? There's not many groups.
No.
Like many groups like continue to exist even if the conditions for what they're doing aren't really right anymore. And I think Clodagh was interesting in the sense that they were like, you know what we've done, that was enough for those 3 years, we're going to go somewhere else. But to answer your question, yeah, we generally don't know who these people are. But I think even if someone would have been like, do you want to go and interview them? Like, do you want to meet them? I would have probably been like, no. Like, I kind of liked dwelling in the kind of the mystery of what they did. And I think the film is very much about that. It's like trying not to identify who these people actually were, because maybe they have terrible politics now and they're really like, I think there's something nice about not like putting a face to it.
The legend lives on.
Yeah, exactly. And it's just like what they did was kind of what matters, rather than the people who they were is what matters. If that makes
Definitely,
sense.
I agree with that. Like, the film we did with J Stack, 3D printed gun.
Yeah.
There's a lot of like what I call snitch style reporting, like after he died, trying to be like, he was this guy, he said this, and I'm always like, well, firstly, I'm never going to talk on that. He's dead, so I respect that he's dead and he can't defend himself. And secondly, like it's more than a person now. It's an idea. I know it sounds corny, but it is. It's a legend out there now, and it kind of, I think groups like that specifically, they kind of take on a new meaning. Like for example, like you want about like Situationist International, like Call It Sleep. I couldn't tell you who made that, you know what I mean? But it doesn't really matter. I couldn't even really, if you watch it, I don't think you can really tie down their politics, but there's something enough in it that tells everybody, left, right, whatever, where you might go, yeah, that's a good point, like something's wrong here. I feel like there's almost none of that anymore. Everything is like on the nose, you better think this, you better think that. Like, what do you think of the state of kind of like political messaging from like radical groups these days?
I mean, I think one of the key things, I mentioned this a little bit when I talked about what Destructionist International is trying to do, but I think so much of kind of contemporary like political leftist messaging is very much like, let's just tell you how like shit everything is, basically. Let me just highlight a little bit more how shit that thing you hadn't thought about it yet actually is. So you can also feel shit about that. And so I think a lot of kind of stuff that's coming out from sometimes interesting groups, but it's just like kind of constantly repeats that sort of like idea of having to, as long as you're in the know of what terrible things are happening, you're gonna like start acting. That's not how people work. Like it has this very like strange idea of like what people need in order to become active. Like, people aren't rational beings. Like, just being told that something is bad is not going to do anything. It's not going to necessarily like lead you to join like an important big movement, or like to associate yourself with like a particular political cause. Like, that's often not how like people become activated. And I think on top of that, I think what often a lot of groups sort of miss is that so many people like talk about the situation international, right? And so they critiqued the fact that a lot of people were very pacified in their era. And I think today it's almost like the reverse. Like, people are just constantly overly activated. We're just like constantly stimulated, just like from our phones. And just like, we're almost overwhelmed with like impulses. And so like, given that, like just to go and like throw in another call to action, again, trying to activate people like is actually quite limited. And so I think that is actually a problem that we need to think about, is like both how do we like circumvent just like giving people more information, but also how do we take seriously that people are generally, a lot of people are just completely overwhelmed. Like how do you break that without just going, oh yeah, the thing you hadn't thought about yet, you need to also become active about this. Like, it seems like that's very limited, and I think it's kind of like starts from a false understanding of what it means for people to become and like to start resisting things, for example, that they disagree with.
Do you think, though, maybe they're pacified by the overstimulation?
Yeah.
Like, there's nothing else they can do but be like ding, ding, ding. Like, you know, I do wonder sometimes, like, especially in this country, I've been saying for a while now, and I'm very much kind of a pessimist, unfortunately, in terms of like what you're saying, this kind of like, here's another bad thing. But I'm almost at the point where I believe the British government can do almost anything to the people. And, you know, I think it's a textbook, unfortunately, a textbook kind of way to defang the working class in the space of maybe 10, 20 years. Our government has kind of done it, and our media really helped as well. Like even so-called progressive channels. If you look at Channel 4 and what they did with Benefit Street, they found like the one street in the whole of England where most of the people that were on benefits didn't work. Everybody else, the vast majority of the country, if you're on benefits, they do work. I think 70% of people on benefits work. But, you know, Progressive Channel 4 did this thing where they said, well, like, here's this circus. And suddenly, I remember watching it as a kid, you know, and you'd look at that and you'd think, well, I don't want to be like that, because these people are like openly being lazy and, you know, just being like, yeah, I don't want to do this, I don't want to work, I don't want to help my community. And all of a sudden, there was this almost thing of like the working class and the underclass, you know, and the working class would be almost like inverted snobs, when really they're like, what, 2 bad months away from being underclass themselves. And it became like this almost like cultural thing now where everybody's just throwing dirt, but no one's really moving, you know. Yeah. Do you think there's any way past that? Is there a way to move out of it? I don't think there is personally, but I'm very negative.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, we say we're dedicated, the Structures International, we're dedicated to the negative. So I think that that pessimism underpins how I think about the world, but also how, as a kind of collective, the stuff we produce kind of like starts from that. And I think what we're trying to do is like create a space for like experimenting with alternative ways of responding to that. That isn't just, again, as I already said, just like pointing towards something that's bad and like trying to activate people in ways that are just, that we've seen just don't work. You know, there's like, the stuff we're up against is like so massive that I think it's almost like, what's the guerrilla logic? Like guerrilla sort of like logic is like, how do you find weaknesses in something that's like much bigger than you are? And so it's almost like what I think we need to do is like think more about kind of like what vulnerabilities are within that, rather than trying to play the same game as them, which would be to just like create big media platforms and just put a voice on it and think that necessarily is going to like change everything. It's almost like if you're kind of like the underdog, like you need to like play clever and you need to do things in a way that like exposes the vulnerabilities that will by default be there. Like going back to Clodo, like what they did really well was like they were attacking something that was massive. Like in terms of the investment in computation at the time was enormous. You had the French government was fully supporting it. Immense, like some of the biggest international corporations were trying to push it, and yet they found ways of like, even temporarily, like undermining those things by finding like weaknesses within it. So I think there's something interesting about kind of thinking about acting in terms of like what vulnerability, like kind of like a hacker, like what vulnerabilities can you exploit? So you don't necessarily need to have the same amount of money or the same platforms like of the same size, but like kind of like what can you do in order to like subvert or like make the most of vulnerabilities and weaknesses, I guess.
Yeah, no, I get that. I remember when, not to blow like our own horn, but when with Popular Front, when we started, we had like no money. We did, one of the first things we did was like this cease and desist jumper where we just found a way to like print, like have our logo embroidered onto champion jumpers en masse. At the time, it was like super popular. So we did it and pretended it was like an official thing. And then when it came out, we were like, oh, it's the cease and desist. And then like, you know, we did get in a little bit of trouble, but the trouble actually helped us spread the message, you know, and we didn't need a budget for that. It was nothing. But that was kind of like frivolous, you know. I do wonder if, like, for example, I would say maybe like a chink in the armor of like kind of extreme multimedia would be like streaming or something. Is like, well, okay, you know, you provide us the platform, now we can get to loads of people. But actually you end up with like Hassan Piker or whatever, which, I don't know, like these leftist tubers, they're just like, they look like immature children when you watch them, you know? It's like, it's embarrassing, I think. And like, I know a lot of people like that, but I just don't see, where is it going, you know? This guy's been engaged in like a 20-week drama with some other fucking streamer, and then this other streamer says something, and it's just a human centipede.
Yeah. I think there's something about the kind of liberal logic of like, oh, we all have our own opinions, and as long as we have debates with each other, like the truth will come as a result of that. And a progressive sort of movements will be made by just, as long as we like keep open the space for discussion. It's the whole freedom of speech sort of debate. It's like, oh, we need to be able to say whatever we want, because if we can't, we don't have democracy. But it's kind of, there's this false sense that by putting together people in the room and having a conversation that therefore you're going to come up with like, you're going to be able to move in a way that's actually like liberating for people, or emancipatory for people. I think there's this overemphasis on like, as long as we just have a seat at the table and can have our voices heard, whether it's through, you know, alternative media platforms or whatever, that therefore we're going to be able to like create a radically different society. I think that's flawed. I think there's like a very limited amount of things you can achieve with that. I think there's this idea of like we'll sit together and we'll figure things out and then we're going to move on. That's just not how it works, because also in part you don't come to the table with the same experiences or like whatever. Like lots of people have been racially abused, and to be sat in front of like, let's say you're a black person, like sat in front of a white supremacist at a table, like it's not a level playing field. You know, this idea that, oh, because we sit at the table together, we're going to be able to like move ahead and like, you know, we can be friends, or we can like amicably sort of disagree with each other. And that is like the sort of like pinnacle of politics. And it's like, no, it's not, you know? That's nowhere near as much as like we need to do in order to like take things in like away from the kind of shit show that we've got now.
Yeah, it's like when the teacher is like, oh, now make up with the school bully.
Yeah.
And even if you do make up and like he leaves you alone, then he's still won. You know, like what he needs is his head punched in, you know what I mean? That is definitely what should be done to a bully, in my opinion. But then it's like, I get this comment a lot of me. I hate to even say it to you, but people always say it to me, and my answer is, I don't know, it's not really my job. But people say to me, well, what's the answer then? Like, what would you suggest if you had to?
I mean, I don't know. I think I'm interested in kind of like more sort of minor interventions and hoping that they add up to something. I think sort of trying to pre-plan everything in advance is just not going to be like, it's just not going to work out, because things turn out differently than how you expect them. So I think, I mean, on a very basic level, not in terms of like, here's what we need to do differently, but I think tapping much more is something that the right has been very good at, is like tapping into people's emotions and like, which is a very different way to the sort of left liberal approach to, oh, we're just going to give you this information and we're going to like rationally like go through all the problems that are there. It's a very different way of doing politics. And I think there's something about, if we can learn something from the right, it's like, it's the way that they manage to tap into like people's like desires and affect the feeling, both like negative, and the left does that to some degree as well, is basically to say, the problem is the ruling classes or whatever, this particular group of people. So do that, but also we also need to start thinking about what kinds of alternative, I guess tapping more into people's positive feelings as well, not just these are all the bad things, but also what are the radically different worlds we could actually begin to imagine without saying we're now going to set a 5-step plan of how to get there. But it's how the right does that well. It's we want to have this fucking white ethno-nationalist state, you know?
It's easy to understand, I think. Exactly. It's fucked up, but the thing the right do is they go, here's a really easy concept, here's why you need it, go. Yeah. And then the left are have you read this incredibly boring book that this rich kid wrote 200 years ago? No, you haven't, you're scum. You know what I mean? I think that's a big problem.
Something about the simplicity. And I think we need to bring back slogans, you know? I think that's something very similar to Structuralist International is how do you make things really snappy, simple? It doesn't mean you don't have to be rigorous because it's not anti-intellectual. I think it has to be you have to seriously think things through, but then go, okay, how do you bring that to something that's going to be understandable and that's going to be appealing, and it's not just how the life decisions that you've made are wrong, it's morally corrupt doing that, whatever, buying that kind of product or buying that type of car. It's kind of moving away from that towards going, okay, what's actually stuff that's going to excite people? Because just victimizing people or moralizing people is just going to make them feel guilty, which is never a good starting point.
Nothing comes from shame, right? No. Nothing good, yeah.
No, so it's what is the kind of, what do you do in order to tap into I don't want to say more positive because I am dedicated negative, but it can be a negative and very critical thing, but it has to have something beyond just moralizing people. That hopefully is kind of a bit more future oriented as well. It's not just what you've done in the past is bad. It's more well, what can we actually build towards a future that's going to be exciting for people?
I'm always pushing, and I never shut up about it, but I'm always pushing and wishing the left in England would look back to revolutionary England. So 1600s, the levelers, the diggers, people that were English from here were oppressed themselves and were let's rise up against the monarchy. They made their vegetables on royal land, handed it out to people. There is no shame in that. They were nothing to do with colonialism. They were the same victims of it, which 99% of people at that time here were. They were probably down a mine or also being killed. Do you know what I mean? And I really wish that someone would say, actually, that would be a positive and the negative, right? So you have a fucked up situation, but we actually do have some history we could kind of pull on and we could recreate that and have the neo-levelers or whatever, but instead they just tell people off. And the thing that really I realize it's a lot of them do not understand the working class. Most of them are scared of the underclass, even though they pretend they want to emancipate them. No, they don't. They don't want that. Trust me. Where I'm from, you don't want to emancipate my friends. You do not. But, I think they're really out of touch. And I think that it just comes across as the head teacher telling you stuff. And I really think it can be that simple of why people are going, I don't want all that work fucking shit. Because people don't want to be fucking told off, And they're not babies. The working class of this country keep the place going. It's not children you then have to explain things to. And for me, it always feels like being talked down to. It's the whole vampire castle kind of thing that, like Mark Fisher said. And I've really seen that explode in the last couple of years. And honestly, people I knew who were apolitical reasonable people have kind of sadly just moved to the right now because they're just sick of being told off,
Yeah. I think that's partially true. I do think there's something about the kind of particular neoliberal moment that is ripe for a kind of right-wing narrative to easily gain ground. So I think it's worth pointing towards some of the weaknesses of the Labour Party or other leftist movements. And I think that's partially legit, but I think we also have to think about how people's lives have gotten worse. And it's much easier to go, let's blame this group of migrants in order to, if we get rid of them, we're suddenly going to have much more, we're suddenly going to be much wealthier, we're going to have our country back and things will be great again. So I think there's something about being critical of how leftist movements and parties have done things, whilst also considering that that this moment is right. It makes it very, it's really easy to be a right-winger today. It's incredibly easy. you just have to go. You just have to point towards scapegoat and go. They're the problem. Let's get rid of them. It's a very easy program, right? Like you don't have to say anything else. That can almost be enough. And
there's no end goal really either.
Exactly. Yeah. And so I think, there's like limits to. I think we need to have both of those things as part of like the same critique. Like understanding that this moment is like neoliberalism is in crisis, and it's like, and the wealthier are getting wealthier, and the poorer are getting poorer. And it's like, how do you respond to that, right? And just telling people like, oh yeah, things are crap. It's like, we know things are crap. We've noticed. We've seen our bills.
We live in it.
Yeah, exactly. But I think one movement as well, when you were talking about kind of historical movements in the UK, one movement I've been very interested in is the Luddites, where they this group of like early 19th century machine breakers. And I think, again, that's like a very interesting story because they were, like often people paint them as just like being anti-technology and like romanticists, primitivists. In fact, when you and there's been lots of books on this recently, when you actually read what they had to say and you actually read about that history, you realize that they're actually anti-capitalists who were just very afraid of like their work, their employment being taken away by the automation, basically. Like very similar to what we're seeing today, right? Like lots of people are afraid of like losing their jobs.
Because of AI.
Because of AI, exactly. And so it's like, I think you're right, like it's sometimes really valuable to look back at like past movements and go, rather than just write them off as just like, whatever, that was just relevant at that time and whatever, we're a different era now. It's like, yeah, it's true, but there might be something about that sentiment that's actually, or like tactics that they use, that was actually really like valuable to like go back to. And I think that's a kind of more productive, sort of like positive way of engaging with politics. It's rather than just going, here's all this bad shit, it's going, actually, this is really cool stuff that people have been doing centuries ago, a few decades ago, a few years ago, a few days ago, whatever it is, but like highlighting that and going, okay, if we think about this seriously, like what would it actually mean for our moment? Like what can we learn from those things? I think that's what, with like Destruction International, but also with my own kind of academic work, I'm really interested in is like looking back at those sort of movements and going, okay, what is it? Why is it that I'm so drawn to this? And then going from there, like what is it that we can learn from it?
Talking about like Clodagh and Machines in Flames, Luddites, I imagine you have come across the work of Uncle Ted Kaczynski, Unabomber. What do you think about his kind of his shtick?
I mean,
rest in peace.
He's a very interesting figure, right? I think he's a very complex figure, and I think the main problem with him is that he had a very sort of, I think his analysis of the problem with like society was flawed. He had a very like individualistic idea of what the problem is. For him, it was like individual scientists or like individual technologists that he as an individual needed to respond to in order to make the whole thing sort of come tumbling down. So I think there's that, his approach to like his analysis of like the problem with technology wasn't like, it's very like anti-civilizational. It's very much like, oh, times used to be so great before the windmill. I'm exaggerating, but like before the times used to be so great, like we need to like respond to that because now the world is so terrible because of all this technology, which is just, I think, a really weak analysis. Like he had no understanding of like the role of capitalism, in my view at least. And so, but also like his politics, he was like very much a racist, and it very much like, it's interesting because people often bring up Ted Kaczynski when I talk about Clodagh in relation to the film. And they're like, oh yeah, this is just like a different version of Ted Kaczynski. I'm like, no, they're very, very different. The critiques are very different. Clodagh was critiquing how computers were put to very specific, very violent uses. In that particular context, they were anti-imperialist, they were anti-capitalist, they were all those things. But Ted Kaczynski was basically just a guy who was upset that new technological advancements were happening and weren't going in the way that he wanted them to go. Like it's a very, very different, like, it's very individualist, like I said, but also I think very flawed understanding of like the problems that we have.
I think he had some really good points, but again, I kind of agree that I went through a stage, just read all his work, you know, I was like, wow, like I stopped using a mobile phone properly for like a year, you know, and I don't know if he was racist though, like was he, like he was very pro-black liberation, you know, like he was super pro-Black Panther movement and stuff like that.
I mean, there's a lot of stuff in his notebooks that are like, it's almost like when Heidegger's like black notebooks came out. It was similar to Ted Kaczynski. When you actually look at like some of the diary stuff. It's
I don't
pretty
remember
messed
that.
up. I mean, very least, I'm not sure if he's explicitly racist, but he's definitely very misogynist.
Definitely that. Yeah.
Very much like a big part of it for him was also like his whole thing was like he wanted to be against the left, just as like a basic sort of impulse. But also he was sort of very romantic. He had like this very romantic idea of like a hunter-gatherer societies and so on, as if like those were great times that we want to go back to, which to me is like a very flawed move. It's like, if you're going to create anything that's going to be exciting to people, it has to have a certain future orientedness to it. And if you're just telling people like, oh yeah, living in a fucking cave is like going to be really good for you, because then you're finally going to feel fully alive again, because you're going to be confronted with a mammoth. But, you know, like there's this idea like of living life in such a way that's like close to nature and is much better than how we live now. But I think that's really romantic, like hopelessly romantic. Like times weren't great then, and it wouldn't be great now. Like it's good that we have things automated that are really crap. You know, I think he falls in that trope. Like he constantly like goes back to these like false sort of images of what the past used to be at, like, and how it's better to not have a phone because you're like your social relationships are suddenly going to be real. It's like it's not really how it works. You know.
Yeah, I think as well you end up like if the society is sick, there's no one cure, you know. But I think as well the problem with Kaczynski a lot of the time was the same problem that like Zerzan had, in that they project how they want things to be. Like Zerzan will be like pretending like some tribe from whoever was like this kind of super liberal woke tribe. It was like, no, it was not. They were like smashing their wives' heads in with bricks and whatever. Same as any tribe anywhere in them times, you know. Shit was crazy. But I feel like everyone can agree at least that I agree, like it's like the Anprim meme. It's like, I love Anprim, and there's a guy with no glasses and he gets like eaten by a leopard, you know, like obviously. But I think anyone can agree there is something like sacred in nature, I feel like. It's like humans, I don't know anyone that can go to nature and not feel like, actually I feel a bit better now. Do you know what I mean? I feel like we need to get back to that.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. But I think there's one thing to appreciate, that's a good thing for people to have. It's another thing to romanticize it.
Yeah, oh yeah.
And like level out all the horrors that were the reality of like living in an environment where you could just be attacked at any point.
Yeah,
like,
that would suck
like,
bad, yeah.
Yeah, it's I think there's like a truth that to the idea that like nature is like a meaningful thing for people to have, and everyone should have the right to nature, and everyone should be able to like engage it in whatever way they want. But that's one thing. It's another thing to say we need to go back to state of nature, which is a very different thing, right? One thing is like, okay, in our contemporary lives, we lack it, and that's really detrimental for our mental health, for example. It's another thing to go, we need to go and live it according to what my sort of imagined ideas of how they used to live, you know?
Yeah, definitely, because they're not like, I remember reading The Creek War. Like, you know, I really love the kind of, like, you know, like the native Indian and the way they had their life and animism or whatever. But if you read about some of the wars, it was hell. Like, that's before like the Europeans came. But that's just how it was, you know. It's like, I have a friend who is, you know, paraplegic and needs technology to live. Yeah. The idea that we'll just go back to nature, what, and she just dies? And some people are like, yeah. And it's like, no, that's like Hitler shit. Fuck that. You know what I mean?
No,
I know what you mean.
Yeah, it's like
there's a fine balance you could get.
I think there's this also, it's like, there's this false idea that like, there's a kind of like pure human, and this is where that kind of ableism comes in. It's like, oh, if you use technology, you're no longer a pure human, which is just like, which is really messed up.
A wheel is technology.
Yeah, it's like, we all rely on it constantly. Like, we're technological before we're human, in the sense that like, we rely on things outside of our bodies constantly. Like, we literally would not be able to live without certain forms of technology. So the kind of, I take real issue with that kind of like romantic idea of like nature, and then like the human within that as this kind of like pure being. It's like, no, that's not, you know, we are tangled up with these things. And I think this is why I'm interested in Claude, right? At some point in one of their communiques, they say like, we are very explicit. They're not like, we want to turn back the clock of time. They're like, our problem is with how, they said like there's something inherently violent about computation, and then that becomes even worse in like the hands of like big corporations and powerful states. I find that much more as far as a sort of critique of technology goes, I find that much more convincing than we need to go back in time and live according to sort of nuclear ideas of like the family, where like the wife does all the whatever, all this, and the man goes and hunts. Like, no, like there's no emancipation in that for so many people.
Yeah, there's like, it's like, well, that might be good for you, but it won't be good for them. Yeah, it becomes very just selfish. I always have this theory, and it is very stupid, but I feel like technology peaked with like PlayStation 1, MSN, you know, dumb phones, really, Nokias, because it was really helpful and really fun, but you could still go out without being distracted by it. Everything wasn't just the same beige, as in like, you know, if there's a subculture in Japan, it ends up some fucking idiot in Los Angeles just destroys it. You know what I mean? And I do think there's some level of gatekeeping that is probably good to have. And I feel like technology now, like you were saying earlier, it was meant to be this like new thing, and it was for a very short amount of time, but now it just feels like it's made everything, like there's no, you know, on the old maps, like here be dragons, there's none now.
Yeah.
And I think that's a real shame, you know. There's no real like mystery left, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But saying that, even with your work, you are finding like mystery, like the Clodo. Like I am keyed into that stuff. Never heard of it. I thought it was really interesting. This new film you've made as well. Maybe talk about that Breach. Like that was something I'd never heard of. Really cool way of doing it. I loved it.
Yeah.
Like what is that? What's Breached?
So Breached is a film about a group of, well, not a group of people, about a person who witnesses people doing like cargo theft. So like taking stuff like Amazon packages and UPS packages and so on from cargo trains in Los Angeles, which actually happened in 2021. There was these images that went viral of these train tracks just filled with ripped open packages. Incredible. So we saw that footage and we were like, oh, this is really interesting. And we started looking into it and we were like, everyone is so angry about this. Everyone is like, these scroungers are just like stealing this stuff and this is all like really disgusting. These are the worst people in society and so on. And we were just like really interested in like how kind of the freight, like cargo and freight was like so sacred to people. Like people who would maybe like watch Westerns and think it's kind of cool, old school, like Western train robbers would see the kind of contemporary iteration of that and be furious about it. And we were like, that's kind of like the starting impulse for the film. It's like, why are people so upset with these thefts? Like, I get that if your package doesn't arrive.
Like, have you ever missed an every package? It's infuriating.
It is infuriating, and I get it. But it's like the extent to it, like you would understand that the individuals whose packages are not arriving are like, come on, man, like don't do that. That's terrible. I needed that. I needed to give a gift to someone or whatever. I needed that medicine. Like that's all obviously all bad stuff. But the extent to which people were angry was just like insane. And then you had Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, coming down to the train tracks, doing this like bombastic speech in which he talks about the memories that never were because all people's packages were stolen and how the place looks like a third world country. And like he just goes on like this massive like like this mediated sort of like rant about how terrible everything is. And so our film is basically a way of trying to understand like why people were so upset about that. What is it about that kind of a mode of transportation and more generally kind of logistics of like global capitalism that makes people really infuriated when it's not as smooth as they want it to be. So the film is, it's sort of told from the perspective of a nearby worker who sees these events and is first a bit like, come on, why are these people doing this? You know, why are they robbing these things and so on? But like increasingly becomes more interested and is like, okay, like what actually is behind this? Not that he's like, oh, this is great, like this is incredible, this is like the emancipation of the future. No, but he's like, I kind of get it, you know, like stuff is really bad for people, and me stealing a few things wouldn't do much aside from making Jeff Bezos slightly less wealthy than he actually is with like the Amazon packages. So it's like the story is like the film is like a short sort of like narrative of like someone like writing down their experiences of going to and seeing these train tracks and like people stealing from them, to kind of like reflect on these like broader questions.
What I really liked about it was not necessarily so much the political
Yeah.
side of it. It was this almost human part where the narrator is just enjoying the spectacle. And I see that a lot. I see something, I think, I know it's bad, I know that sucks, but I'm kind of not unhappy it happened. Like, I don't think it should happen, but the fact that it's just, there's something magical about whatever it is, it's like, that was fucking cool, you know?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think there's something about something that is supposed to like function perfectly in our contemporary age, that like being pierced. And it shows, and it goes back to what we were talking about earlier about like vulnerabilities. Again, I don't think that these people robbing this stuff is like politically meaningful necessarily or anything like that. But what is interesting is like, I think this is why we're sort of drawn to these things. It's like actually this thing, like, you know, something like Amazon, Jeff Bezos, one of the wealthiest people on this planet, to see something like that, just like disrupted for a moment, just like makes you giggle for a moment.
Right, yeah.
I think that's kind of similar to Clodo. It's like, it's kind of funny.
Yeah.
It's like you look at it and you're like, ha.
It's like a bank robbery.
Yeah.
Like,
It's
I mean,
like,
that's cool. Like, bank robbery, who gives a fuck? Like, as long as you're not hurting anyone in the process, who gives a fuck, you know?
I think this is the appeal of like something like the 1980s computer bombers, but also like these like thieves basically. It's like, oh, they found a way to like mess with the system that's really harmful for a lot of people. And they like find ways of like gaining from it themselves. Like it's very parasitic, right? It's like, oh, there's these products, I'm just gonna take it. Like I'm gonna benefit of like capitalists sort of commodities, you know? It's very selfish. But there's something interesting about them going, you know what, we're gonna do, you know, we're just gonna exploit this.
We can just rob the train.
Yeah, it's like, and that shows like a sort of vulnerability that I think is often, like we often miss when we just focus on like how terrible things are, where we just like feel overwhelmed by the shitness of it all. You know, it's like actually there's things that are possible, whether we agree with the things happening or not.
I think sometimes it goes too far the other way though. Like I've seen a lot of like internet leftists in America will be like, why are you bothered that there's crime there? And it's like, well, the people living there are like being oppressed by it. You know, like there's this thing of, I saw a guy the other day saying that like he had to buy a gun because he was living in some like rough area of Baltimore, and all these like leftists just attacking him, being like, why do you care? And he's like, I don't want my car stolen. Like, do you know what I mean? And they were like, fuck you. And I was like, well, none of these people live there. But like, there is something even more interesting, I think, was with like Newsom coming down and being so angry and like having this like biblical level bullshit. And I know this might be a stretch, but he is a politician. When kids are getting their fucking heads blown off in places, not the same anger. You know, it's like the real angriest or most performative he's probably ever been was like Amazon packages. And it's like you couldn't put a cherry big enough on the top of that. You know, it said a lot, I think.
Yeah, exactly. I think he knew that people are really upset about this more than they are upset with like kids literally starving. So he was like, I'm just going to jump on this and turn it into a big media spectacle. Like, it's hilarious. Like, he puts on these little like latex gloves and like goes and like pretends like he's cleaning up the train track.
Yeah.
Like, he was probably there for like 10 minutes. You know, it's like he just jumps on it because it's like a spectacle that he can tap into and that he can like further expand for his like political benefit without having to do anything. He's just like, he doesn't have to tackle any of like the actual serious issues that are happening in California. He can just go, oh, I'm just going to make sure that there's more security here. It's like, and he looks good doing that, but doesn't actually have to do anything. Doesn't actually have to tackle like the complex problems that are like emerging in California, have long existed there.
Yeah. There's some stuff I was reading on your manifesto that I wrote down because I was like, this is super interesting. I would love to like, you know, hear more from what you said. So there's this bit on here, it says like, you said, politics as the acquisition of information leads only to the endless loop of self-congratulation. Now, like, I get it, but also it took me about 10 minutes to process. Like, I was wondering, can you like expand on that? Like maybe just, because I think that is quite a like really important topic for what's going on right now, but it's also a little bit hard to kind of talk about, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
It's quite complicated.
Yeah. So the manifesto that I wrote is quite polemical. Like, it's supposed to be that. It's supposed to, like, to a certain degree, like, upset people.
Good, yeah.
And so I get what we mean specifically with that is, we talked a little bit about this before, but it's this idea that if, as long as we like get information about the world, we should feel happy about ourselves and feel like we've done our duty. You know, it's this kind of idea, like as long as we watch enough documentaries and know that there's all these, whatever, there's terrible shit going on, and now I know it, and it's almost like I've done my duty. Like I'm now sort of morally superior to those who are not in the know. And so I think what we're trying to say is basically to argue that we need to think about doing media and producing outputs like films, like text and so on, that are just try and carve a different path, that aren't just about just sharing information about things. Because A, that often doesn't do much, B, we're already overwhelmed with information, and C, it doesn't like tap into like kind of deeper desires that people have, aside from just like guilt maybe, or shame, or something like that. You know, so I think it's about trying to highlight the need for like other ways of doing things that are not just like overly like here are like rational reasons why you should disagree with this or agree with this. It's like what other kind of like desires, emotions and feelings can you tap into? So I think that's what we're trying to do with some of the work we do, but also I guess in the manifesto are setting up as like something we need to think about.
So what are your thoughts on like political nihilism? I find that super interesting, and maybe you can explain what it is as well, because I think people think nihilism is like just kill myself or whatever, or kill everything. Like there's a lot more to it.
Do you mean political nihilism in terms of like the kind of like a Russian sort of historical thing of like, or do you mean just like a more general sort of sense?
No, yeah, as a movement, like, you know, like ITS, like conspiracy cells of fire, like it is like a militant concept. Yeah.
I find it interesting in the way that I find Clodagh interesting. I think there's something about it that feels very different to kind of how we tend to think about politics, which tends to just be like, there's a problem, let's go and address that specific problem, you know, like very sort of reformist sort of politics. So there's something interesting about political nihilism, and that is both kind of appealing and flawed about it. It's like very simplistic, right? It's like the whole world is like catastrophic, so we just need to like burn the whole thing down. Or even like the world could be Western civilization, or it could be like another kind of like total system. So I think I find it interesting. I think ITS is where do we even begin talking about these people?
I mean, for anyone that doesn't know, we should just say like it was the most mental group I've ever looked. I spoke to them, you know, and ITS is like what the individualist tending towards savagery, militant group who started off as anti-tech, but basically were like destroy everything. And to be honest, they're fucking clowns. Half of the shit they claim to have done, they lied about. But yeah, I mean, what did you think? Well, they must have been on your radar when they came out.
Yeah, for sure. I think they're interesting. I think they make the same move that a lot of these movements make, which is to become like anti-civilization and then like anti-science, anti-modernist. And I think that's which leads to them literally going and killing anyone they feel like represents contemporary society or like industrial civilization or something like that, which is just like you're just going after individual people who've done nothing wrong. It's like the thing. It's like the Ted Kaczynski thing of like I'm just going to go after a few individuals and like it's going to solve all our problems.
Worst targets ever as well. Yeah. I might say if he believed in what he said, worst targets ever. Like who gives a fuck?
Yeah. So I think ITS it's kind of the anti-tech stuff that's very like anti-civilization, very primitivist. And like I read some of their stuff, some of the stuff that ITS write, and like some of the stuff is really, it's quite interesting. You know, I think there's something appealing. Right? Like they write really well, but also like at some point they make this argument, which I found really interesting, which they respond to someone who said, "Oh, you're just primitivists," you know, which is what I would also think they are. But they're like, no, we're not primitivists because we don't have like a romantic idea of like what the past or like hunter-gatherer societies used to be like. They were very violent, and we want to go back to that. Which is just this really messed up.
Very original, though.
It's very original.
At the time.
Like intellectually, like it's a really interesting idea. It's really messed up, but it's like I'm intellectually like intrigued by it because it's a very interesting argument. It's like no, we're not romantic about how things used to be without Western technologies. We want the kind of violence that existed then, which is like the worst possible argument you could ever make to try and convince anyone, but they don't seem to be interested in kind of creating a mass movement. They're just more like, and this is the thing with political nihilism, it's a kind of lash back against something they disagree with, whatever the kind of consequences of that. Like, it's literally just, I disagree with this, I'm going to burn it down. And I think Clodagh had some of that, but they had the analysis to come with it that was more like, we're only going to attack things that are not going to lead to people getting killed, and then we're also going to attack the things that are like literally like the centers of power, of capitalist and like state power. Whereas ITS is just like, oh, a tourist walking in a nature reserve, let's go and kill him because he represents civilization. It's like, what?
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
Like, your analysis is completely flawed. Like, your target is completely wrong. Like, that person that you've killed could have been exploited in so many other ways. Like, you have no idea who that person is.
Also, like, just fucking grow up.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
I ended up talking to, we were going to make a film about them with Popular Front, but we ended up finding out they were just lying all the time about like attacks. I was like, I'm not fucking giving these guys, I don't like liars, you know. And that the first thing, as bad as they were, I was like, it is actually very honest, you know, what they say they want to do. And I ended up talking to one of them, and he was giving us this nihilistic spiel and blah, 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 and we shouldn't exist, and I want to kill innocent people. I said, well, why don't you just fucking kill yourself? And like, that wasn't like a kill yourself dork. Like, I was like, genuinely like, wouldn't that make sense? Because he was like, humans, we're pollutants, we're polluting the world, we need to give back to nature. And he was like, well, yeah, maybe I will. It was just this, and then we both kind of laughed, and it was like this weird moment. But I was like, how do you get to this point? And I think a lot of those groups don't actually realize the seriousness of pure revolutionary violence, you know, especially these kids online who were like, you'd go against the wall and we want a red state for this. I'm like, have you ever seen real, like, what that looks like? Like, you think in the utopia you're gonna be like arts and crafts. You're probably not. You're probably gonna be shot in the head. You know what I mean? And I think there's this romanticism everywhere, left, right. And I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, we only exist on our own time, but I feel like it's never been so like prevalent. Like, everyone want to live in the 80s. Everyone want to live in here. Everyone want to do this. I don't know what that is. Why do you think that is?
I mean, we talked about Mark Fisher before. Like, one of the key things that like our contemporary moment has done is like robbed us of any sense of like a different future.
Yeah.
You know, like Mark Fisher's idea of capitalist realism is the idea that like, you know, it's easier to imagine the end of the world than it is to imagine the end of capitalism. And so I think that explains in part why so many people are just going back to things, because we like our imagination has been shrunk to just like, what can I do as an individual in terms of like my consumer choices versus what would a radically different political project look like? Like, our brains are so occupied with like just being online and like just like consumer choices and all of that. Like, we seem to have very little like spaces and time and energy to collectively come together and actually imagine what a radically different world would look like. And I think if that is not like the aim you have in terms of like trying to like speak to people and convince them, and then I think you're kind of like doing the wrong thing. Like, it's like you have to like make spaces where like radically different imaginations become possible, rather than just, oh, let's just copy paste what they've done in the past. Because first of all, the conditions will have changed. What Clodagh did in the 1980s is very much irrelevant today, because like, just to give one example, like computers are now in our pockets and they're everywhere, and they're not just capitalists sort of tools used by the state and big corporations. They're just like everyday life for everyone. This is one example. So like, yeah, things have completely, every single time you just go, oh, let's just copy paste this from the past, things will be different. But also, there's often this danger of just like romanticizing, let's say, a revolutionary moment as if there weren't loads of people killed, you know? Like, there's this sort of tendency, like these people who still hold on to like the Soviet Union, like today, and I'm like, really? Like, that was a terrible place to live, and lots of people died. Like, how can you have that, like that kind of like rosé glasses that you don't see that? It's like try and be brave and like think of something different. Like, try and think forward and like come up with different ideas, rather than just like, let's just do this thing that was maybe slightly better than what we have now. It's like, no, like we need to be like a bit more courageous.
I agree with that, actually. Like, as much as I am very negative and like, there's just, my kind of thing is like, look after you and yours, try and look after your family, because everything's fucked. But like, obviously, my mum used to say to me, well, what if everybody thought like you about things? I'm like, well, that's never going to happen, and thank God. You know, like, I do understand that like that's not the best way, and I'm probably a part of the problem. But I do agree that like simply going, well, let's get back to this. It's like that's never going to work on any level. But with the internet, with this total free run of information, I remember looking at old magazines. My granddad used to collect a computer, what was it called? I don't know, some computer magazine, Computer Active. It was great. And it was this idea that like the whole world is open up now and, you know, new information, people will change their ideas. But what I found they've done is often double down on them, because not only is information free, contrarianism is free, and like alternative history is free. And there's just so much nonsense now. It's like, I don't know, sometimes I do understand when people are like, I just give up. I'm just gonna watch bullshit TV. And also, why not? Like, who am I to say, like, you shouldn't be doing that? You should be educating yourself. Fuck, I get it, you know? It's not for me, but I do understand it. And I think there's like a worry that like very clever people are just going, fuck it, I can't be bothered anymore, you know?
Yeah.
I think that's happening a lot.
Yeah, I think so. And I think that's in like service of like those people who benefit from it, right? Like who are just like, it's really nice for like mainstream political parties to not have a population that can be bothered, you know, to just have people like, whatever, we'll just
It's the best for them.
It's like the, you know, it's the classic thing you see when you like compare like UK history to like French history. Like in the UK, there's sort of like, oh, whatever, we'll just like suck it up and like move on. Compared to France, it's like, what are you gonna make a minor change to this entirely irrelevant law? We're going on the streets and we're burning things down.
Yeah. I prefer that though.
There's something like, I think there's something about the kind of pacification that is really problematic. And I think you're right, it's easy to like fall into that. And I get like why people do it. And I wouldn't like say, you can't do that, you have to like go on the streets. And it's like, I get why people are really like demotivated and feel like indifferent towards everything. But it's also worth keeping in mind is that what the kind of those in power, whereas larger corporations or like bigger states, like that's what they want. So it's like, how do you hold those two things together, right? Like knowing that it's understandable that people don't want to like, that they're just tired, but also knowing that tiredness serves that, you know, serves certain people who just want to like make more money off us, you know?
There is also now like this very prevalent idea I've seen, especially with the younger generation, of like just get the bag, and the idea that just getting rich will free you. And they're not really wrong, because the way things are, like it will free them, but it's kind of created this thing where there's no solidarity where they're from now, right? So there is in certain places, but normally in the worst ways possible. Like some drill gang is like proud of their area for killing the most amount of teenagers, you know? But like back when I was young, you'd kind of be like, yeah, this is where we're from. Like we might not have this, we might not have that, but fuck you, you're from a mile down the road, so we don't like you. Like obviously there's some level is silly, but there was some cohesion, whereas now all I see is like, we just got to get out. That I think is quite new.
Yeah, I think it is. And I think it's very particular to our moment where we're constantly told that we're responsible for our individual problems. It's like, oh, you're poor because you don't work hard enough, versus you're poor because you didn't have an inheritance and your parents worked their asses off but didn't manage to buy a house and now they're still renting and you're struggling. It's like it's individualizing the problem and then also individualizing the possible responses by saying, well, you just have to hustle more and then you're going to be one of the wealthy ones. Like, you're right, like there's a sense of collectivity that there used to be in this country, for example, like amongst working classes, of like, let's fight together for like an improvement of our lives, including our working lives. That just is like, has diminished so radically and has turned into this like very capitalist way of like responding to our capitalist problems. It's like, oh, let's just deal with it as an individual. And yeah, if it means fucking people over on the way, who cares?
Right.
You know, rather than
Demonic.
we're comrades and like, let's fight together and like, yeah. So I think you're absolutely right.
We still have it in like where I'm from, like my Thai boxing gym, we have like almost like a union of parents now, so that when all the younger team go away to fight, like all over the country, everybody puts a bit of money in and we can afford petrol and we can maybe rent a bus and we can go. And it's like on a very small scale, it still happens, but yeah, it's very rare now. I see it kind of, it really, there's no pride in even shit. You know, like we would say it's a shithole, but it's our shithole. Even now it's like, who gives a shit, you know? And I don't know, I think that's a real shame. I think you can still build out of a kind of, I don't know, like there's maybe not a collective misery, but there's like, I noticed, this is a weird example, but the other night, it was about 2 a.m. and some nutter drove out of the estate near where I live at like 80 miles an hour, crashed into my neighbor's car so hard that it wrote the driver's car off. His car smashed into 2 other cars, whatever. I was like, what the fuck is that? I thought it was travelers trying to steal my car. Like they've been doing some stealing recently where they're like, you know, just put your car in the back of a fucking pickup truck. So I run outside, I was like, what the fuck? My neighbor runs out like just in his boxers. My 2 other neighbors I've never spoke to. Like anyway, long story, there's all this drama. For the last however many days, we're all talking now. And we'd never spoke before, you know, but we're kind of like, oh, what's happening? And then, you know, I said to him, do you need a hand with this? And he's like, nah, but thanks. Like, you know, by the way, my name's whatever. And I was like, why the fuck did it take a nutcase driving into our cars to properly talk to each other? And maybe that's my fault.
Maybe that's what we need around the country. People just like driving into
yeah, maybe we need drunk driving. No, I'm joking. We need drunk driving. But like, do you think maybe there's like, I know it's a right-wing thing, often they say it, but sometimes I do think there's some truth in that there needs to be some kind of chaos to maybe bring people together again. I don't know. Is that just romantic thinking as well?
I mean, I think there's something about misery bringing people together, and I think something like really great can emerge from that. But I think, as you're saying, often that stays on a very sort of micro level.
Yeah.
I don't think it's romantic. I think that's what, for example, class politics has long been. Like, we've been exploited collectively for so long, we're not going to take it, we're going to demand these things, or we're going to strike or whatever. Like, there is something to like, we're all sharing this misery, why not do something together? I think the difficulty is that given kind of how our lives are organized and what we've been told is like the right thing to do, which is just to like individually try and get out of the misery and then just like say, bye, I'm now gonna, you know, live a nice life. Like there is that, I think in order for that kind of misery to build up to something like bigger, like lots of like social and cultural change would need to take place for that to become possible. Otherwise it's just gonna like stay on a micro level, and that's great and that's meaningful. But if we're talking about like more like bigger macro change, I think you need probably like a lot of like cultural change would need to happen for people.
Fucking asteroid, maybe.
Yeah.
It's actually, I remember reading in Tribe by Sebastian Junger, great writer, great journalist. And there was a part, and I don't agree with the whole book, but there was a really interesting part of it where when the Blitz happened in London, you probably know about this, but when the Blitz happened, the government put a load of money aside being like, right, we're going to have a lot of mental health issues. People are going to go fucking nuts. We need to just be careful and put a load of money aside. The opposite happened. You had people, so much to the extent that people from the mental institutions ended up recovering so much that they ended up driving ambulances, like as like, you know, volunteers. And it was like in the space of the kind of chaos, people found something to do, and it was really interesting case study in that actually it really helped. No, I really hate this idea when people are like, we need a good war. As someone who has seen war, we fucking don't. It's horrible. Your family will die. Like, you know, awful things will happen. But I don't know. I think there is like this, when there's a collective space for each individual, you become bigger. Now, there's almost like people don't find it because they're online at home so much.
Yeah.
I think Get Outside is I know it's outplayed, but it makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, it reminds me of how, like, after hurricanes and so on, you see, like, but even like during COVID, like the levels of solidarity we saw at the beginning of COVID was like we hadn't seen it in a very long time. Yeah. And I think that shows like the value of like mutual aid networks and like soup kitchens and like just like stuff, like on the ground stuff, basically providing for people and like taking care of each other. I think these structures are like so essential, not just to how like our contemporary societies live in terms of like providing for people who otherwise don't have access to certain things, but also in terms of like building potentially interesting alternatives. It's like, what if we make that more central? You know, what if more money starts going into that, for example? You know, maybe then those kinds of like miserable situations actually can like on a sustained level like grow into something bigger.
Maybe, maybe. What do you think of AI? Like, I kept meaning to ask this because I was thinking you must have some thoughts on that. You know, tech, it's the biggest thing ever. It's the smallest, I don't know. What is going on? What do you think?
Oh, AI.
Do you hate it?
I hate the hype around it.
Yeah.
I hate how it's been used, and I hate the kind of what they say the problem or the threat is, which is, oh, we're all gonna be replaced by machines and like humans are gonna go extinct. I think that pisses me off, because that's not what's gonna happen. If you look at other technologies in the past, what usually happened is just like, oh, people who were poor had their jobs taken away, or like our lives just became in certain ways just shitter than they already were. So I think AI is like, I don't think it's an existential problem necessarily. I think it's more a problem of like just making people's lives, whose lives are already quite shit, even worse, whether by putting them on the streets or just like the little bit of fun people might have is just like taken away from them, because like the part of like the basic creativity they might have in their lives might be like taken away, because like a computer is now doing the work, the AI is now doing the work. So I don't have much hope for it, and I think there's a big problem with there's all these people who are like, oh, AI is going to solve the climate crisis, which is nonsense. Like, there's this sort of techno-solutionist thinking whereby you've got this really complex problem, political problem, social problem, economic problem, which is climate crisis, and you're saying, oh, we're just going to solve it through a technology. It's like, if nothing else changed and only the technologies change, like literally nothing is going to change. Like, these things are not going to solve all our problems. So I think there's blind belief in like, AI is going to solve our problems. It's like, it's maybe something fun to experiment with and whatever, you can play around with it. I know I have issues with people doing that, I've done that, but it's like people who put like all their hopes into it. I'm just like, really? Like, that's just gonna, like, do you know who's like realizing this? You do realize that the wealthiest person on this fucking planet is like pumping so much money into this. It's like, take a look at who's pushing this and then reconsider whether AI is gonna like create this beautiful luxury life for us all. Like, it's not.
There's no way, yeah. I mean, like Sam Altman, Zuckerberg, just demons. Like demons, and they're the ones that are like trying to and Musk try and pioneer it. I have like, my opinion on AI has changed a lot. Like, I was speaking to Ben Ditto about it, and he had some really interesting thoughts on it. And I saw a friend of mine who she can no longer speak because of her disability, and they used her voice from documentaries she'd made. So now when she writes with her eyes, and it's her voice again. And I was like, that's beautiful, and that itself made me come down off my like perch a little bit about like, fuck AI. But like, I see it like you just said, like it's like the electric car. Like, oh, the electric car will save, it's not saving anything, it just makes people that want to do a little bit feel good about it. And it makes the ugliest cars you've ever seen on earth, you know what I mean? And it's one of them ones, I don't know, I'm not sure. Do you think it's a bubble though? Like, there's a lot of talk now that it's a bubble and it's going to burst soon.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's very likely. The amount of hype around it.
It's weird.
It's like, they even admit, like Sam Altman, like, he admits like that so many of the things that he's like proclaiming is just like, they haven't figured it out. We're just like, we'll just sort it out when it comes to us. It's like, well, you're like, this investment is like an unprecedented level of like money going into like a very specific set of technologies. Like, that's completely like novel. Like, that has not happened in a very long time. And so I feel like that cannot but lead to a certain crisis, whether it's like an AI bubble bursting, lots of people losing money, or something like different to that, I don't know. But I think the hype around it just can't keep going. Like, it can't live up to that. Like, there's also this, like, from a sort of environmental perspective, like the planet cannot provide artificial general intelligence without literally burning like into fire. Like, it can't.
Why is it? Is it the water or something?
It's water. It's like general like CO2 emissions. More generally that
for where they process it.
Yeah.
All.
It's like, it's insane. Like, just the amount of energy it uses is like already today, and like looking at the plans that they have, like already it's like greater than like certain big nation states, just like for like keeping the data centers running. And they're like, oh, but we need artificial general intelligence. We don't just need AI, we need AGI to really be able to solve our problems, to really have a radically different future. It's like, yeah, but what about people who are already like fucking suffering because of climate change? Like, it's like, it's so like absurd to me that so many like people go down that route. again, I get why like there's some excitement around it and it can do things and it can do meaningful things. Like you were saying, like for your friend, like that's obviously good stuff. But it's like that's not what AI is being built for. It's not being built to help someone get their voice back. Like that might be a nice side effect.
Sure, yeah.
But it's really just like the fact that it's these almost like a handful of people pumping like literally billions into this should make us go, are they really trying to like make medical sciences better, or do they have something else going that they want to do? I mean, I'm not saying that there's some kind of conspiracy, but I think there is definitely a sort of, they want to make more money off this, and they want to become more wealthy through it, and they want to be the people who are like, they want to be able to put their name to this super intelligence that's going to emerge. It's super selfish. It's like they have no like social or collective like plans for this. Like there is nothing like, they don't want to go and help people. So like, yeah, if there's like nice like side effects that are good for people, like that's great. But like this blind belief in AI and the people behind it, I'm like,
So there's something I read in your manifesto that I agree with, but I want to know why you think it is. It says, basically you say that TED Talks are quote unquote obscene. And I agree, but I want to hear why you think that.
I think they're obscene for various reasons. I think very often it's like, it's pure entertainment, right? It's like trying to, always follows like a similar structure, which is like, okay, there's this thing you didn't know, and it's really bad, but there's this really good thing you also didn't know, and look how great things might now be. It's like very like standard like narrative arc that just, on a very basic level, just really annoys me, but also I feel is like, it just dumps things down to such a degree that it's almost like, it's embarrassing to the audience. I'm not saying all TED Talks are like that, but so many of them are just like, so like taking something really complex and being like, I'm going to tell a personal story about it and make you feel good at the end. Like it's just a standard like motive of like catharsis. It's like, oh, this is bad thing, and at the end you're going to feel better, and you're going, and you know, look at me bringing this like lovely story, and it's like, it just feels so far removed from reality. And it just feels like if Hollywood would just create like a platform for like smart or quasi-smart people to go and say something like that's what TED Talks would look like. Just like pure entertainment with like very little depth.
It's like wine mum philosophy, you know what I mean? It's all over LinkedIn and shit like that. Have you seen Sam Hyde's paradigm shift? Yeah. Basically, he kind of snuck his way into a TED Talk. The whole thing is like very funny. Like, yeah, I don't agree with his politics, but it's a very funny thing. And he's literally, there's points where he's saying like about old people. He's like, in future, we're just gonna kill them. And everyone's like it's just like, you know, he just says the maddest shit and everyone's like, kind of like, okay. I think at some point the audience kind of realized, but it really kind of ended them a while, you know, because it was like the dumbest thing and everyone's like, I think it's this thing of like, I can feel smart if I go to this, you know, and it's like, you don't even need to, like, what even is smart? Like, you know, it's I don't know. It's like people start talking about IQ. The fuck are you talking about? Like, you know, like it's ridiculous. Anyway, I hate TED Talks too. What's next for Destructionist International? Have you got any plans, like any goals?
Yeah, I mean, there's a few things we're working on at the moment. One of them is a film which starts from a kind of recent resistance to like Tesla, like the protest at dealerships and so on, which I don't think is necessarily that interesting, but like it starts from that and looks at, to like think about kind of more generally about kind of struggle and resistance in like car manufacturing and resistance to car manufacturing and like cars, which I find really like often very absurd, but really interesting.
Detroit is a great example.
Yeah, but also like, I know we've done a podcast before where we talk about the kind of anti-Tesla sort of sabotage and so on, which I find really interesting as well. So the next film we're making is, we're not quite sure yet of what the narration will be, but it's like thinking about, like we're framing it around sort of how to sabotage a Cybertruck, because I think there's this generalized sense that Cybertrucks are ugly and are ridiculous, and so it's like kind of like tapping into that to like talk more about kind of like interesting histories of like labor movements around in Detroit, but elsewhere as well, and kind of like thinking about again sort of back to the point of like what we try and do with DI is with the Structures International is like is there something interesting there that we can learn from? It could be that we keep doing research and we're like, actually there's not much there that we want to do, that we want to like put out as a film. But that is the sort of immediate thing that we're working on. We've got some other kind of like vague ideas for films. Problem is, I'm based in London, my collaborator is based in LA, and it's just difficult to like collaborate and like get together. So there's like always delay between our projects. But it's quite nice. It's like quite a nice and slow pace.
I love the work you're doing, man. My really good friend of mine, Charlie, he got a Tesla because it's like a good tax write-off. One of the nicest guys you've ever met. He's like, I was like, oh man, that car fucking sucks. Next day, he just sends me a picture and someone's just drawn a swastika on it. And he was like, for fuck's sake. He's like, I just wanted the tax write-off. I was laughing, man.
But it's interesting that some people are like, you get these stickers, right? Like, I got my Tesla before Musk went nuts. It's like, Musk was always nuts.
Yeah.
Like, to think that he suddenly like made a move towards like right-wing libertarianism is just absurd. It's like, he's a white South African who benefited from apartheid, and like, you know, it's very clear what his always been very clear what his aims were. Just making fuckloads of as much money as he can through basically whatever means. And if that means building green cars, so be it.
Yeah, he doesn't give a fuck.
No, he doesn't care about that. And so I find it interesting when people get upset that their Teslas get like swastika on it. I mean, I understand. It's like, it's not nice.
Yeah, it sucks.
Like, but at the same time, it's like, what did you expect?
I just thought it was so funny because it was him, like the nicest guy you've ever met. But I also like the idea of like the Structures International. It's like, the way I'm understanding it is it's kind of, there's a fuck you dad concept like that. Like, oh, let's smash up a Starbucks. But then it's like, well, actually stretch out. There's something really interesting to that. And there's all this other stuff. And I think like in general, that is always worth doing, right? Like instead of just like focusing on, I mean, you do focus on negative, like you said, but there's always some positive in it, I feel.
Yeah, and I think rather than just going, oh, look, here's this cool stuff, it's actually try and like sit with it and actually think about it, what it actually does and what the differences are between the conditions of like whatever, Claudel in that particular moment and today. It's like use that as a sort of jumping board for like thinking, because I think so much stuff is like, so much of the stuff we see online is just like the TED Talk, it just feels like a dumbing down. And I'm not saying that our films are really intellectual or whatever, but it's like, at least the aim is to do critical analysis, but in a way that's going to be like interesting to people, or is like through an interesting narrative, rather than just, here's a critique of something. Is actually like, building that story through things that are just really, on a very simple level, just really cool and interesting.
I like it, man. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it, man. It's been really interesting, boy. Thank you.
Thank you.
Cool. We're done.